Welcome to the Equity Institute's podcast on the purpose of public education with me, Vincent Perez. Today, we are going to have Dan Call. Now, Dan is one of the most effective, most kind educators that I know. Dan connects with students and seeks to understand them and their lived experience and brings that into world language learning. I've known Dan for multiple years. I've had the privilege of serving with him on La Cima bilingual leadership staff, as well as the Dare to Dream Academy staff. Please welcome Dan Call. Dan, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time, especially as the school year has begun. For our audience, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and what is your connection to public education?
For sure. Thank you, Vincent. Well, my name is Daniel Glenn Call Orozco, and I am a father of three, one who just got sent off to college. I have a partner also. We are celebrating 20 years of marriage this year. And in addition to that, I count myself Latinx, Chileno, and Aymara in terms of my ethnicities, as well as white. I've been trying to make it a point to explore those as I lead my students. Also, I'm a public educator. This is also my 20th year teaching, and I've been teaching mostly at the high school level. My classes, I do all levels of Spanish. And so first, second, third year Spanish, AP Spanish. And this is also my 10th year since we initiated Heritage Spanish. Outside of that, I also do a lot of professional development, particularly with world language teachers, but I've also done some research and some practice and just kind of sharing around the topic of ungrading or student.
Ungrading? Could you say more about that?
Oh, for sure. Ungrading, I have to credit two big names, at least, that have helped me with taking my plunge into this, but Jesse Stommel and Alfie Cohn. But the big idea really is just that grading is something that we have added into the education system in about the last 120, 130 years, maybe, that has really done, it's meant to communicate to students what the quality of their work was, right, to say something about that. But for most students, it's become the thing that they're chasing after, the grade itself, instead of the actual improvement of their skills, their work, and it gets in the way of. And if we look historically at schooling, grading is really a very recent phenomenon that's taken place. And there are a lot of teachers who are a little tired of students only concerned with what it takes to get an A, as opposed to, what does it take to expand my learning? What does it take for me to get better at a skill? And so we're part of a growing movement of teachers, educators at all levels, including higher ed, who are just interested in how we can restore the focus on our learning as opposed to the grades.
So 20 years in the classroom, this perspective on ungrading, and really, I think what I know of you as an educator, and I want to say out front here, you're one of the best teachers I know in my whole life. So I really respect your approach, I think, and care for students. And here we're talking about learning, right? And really honoring, like, what is the learning? So my big question here on the outside is, what is the purpose of public education?
For me, it needs to be mostly about connecting us to our own humanity, what makes us us. As well as, when I talk about opportunity, I'm more interested. A lot of people say, like, education should connect us to opportunity, but I think it should more be about liberation, in terms of helping us to see the world for what it really is, and then help us to act as agents within that, help us to see how we have the ability to interact with. We don't have to play necessarily by the prescribed rules, right? We have the ability to interact with, to affect change, to negotiate meaning. And so I guess another part that I would add into, for me, the purpose of education, at least in this country, it really can be the generator for democracy. If we do it in a way that is inclusive and that awakens within students their own mastery of things that they can then apply to achieve their own goals.
You make me think of the quote from Paulo Freire about reading the word and reading the world. So there's something about purpose and finding your place in the world.
Definitely. Yes. Freire looms large in my mind, in my philosophy towards education. His notions, first of all, of banking education, we continue to see in schools by and large, right? And I don't want to completely downplay that because, like for instance, as a teacher of AP Spanish, part of the class is to prepare students to succeed in that test. But I approach it from the angle of Lisa Delpit. I'm teaching them the code of power. I'm teaching them that a multiple choice, test, or a test that is maybe seeking to elicit a specific kind of answer, is a necessary evil to endure so that you can then break through the system. And I also teach them how to subvert that, how to look at it critically. But yeah, I'm very much in line with Freire's ideas about read the world. In addition to that, if we can teach them to see it for what it is, and to go back to an even older teacher, we could look at the allegory of the cave, right? That's one that we explored quite a bit. And so the Greek philosopher who elaborated on that is just simply bringing us to this idea that a lot of times we're focused on the shadows, we're focused on the stuff that that somebody else is putting in front of us to keep us from actually acting as agents for ourselves.
So something of empowerment and liberation and agency.
Definitely. Agency being a big thing to me that comes both from my approach to education, my own philosophy, as well as a key component of my spirituality. As I was raised in a tradition that really placed a heavy emphasis on agency as something which we believe is foundational to the world. Like before creation, there was, as we say in our founding myths, our founding stories, there was a war over agency that was to be fought. And for a lot of us, although we have different ways of looking at it, it's something that continues today.
The power of choice. There really is something there around in education systems, what choices are available, I think, to many folks in it, right? Students for sure, but even educators, as things become more and more prescribed. And I think my assessment is really like we trust teachers less. And I want to trust teachers more, especially around this concept of being in relation with students and helping to build their agency.
Yeah, I have to admit too that I've had an advantage as a world languages instructor. Initially, when I got into education, I was hoping to become a history or social studies instructor, but Spanish was the only position available, and I needed something urgently as our first child was about to be born. And so I really wanted some security. So I took Spanish and thought maybe I can move to social studies. But I learned quickly that Spanish not being one of the core curriculum classes, I was on the periphery, and there was some power in that because when I would have an administrator or somebody who was, probably interested in maintaining a tight leash on what was going on in the class, they would walk into my classroom and not have any expertise, any idea what to do. And I really learned to appreciate that. Not all teachers have that. And I'm not trying to bamboozle my administrators, but I just realized that there was a bit of agency out there when there was less supervision and less control. And that's something that I feel a little sorry for some of the other teachers who maybe have a more prescribed curriculum, right? I had to cobble together. And there was a textbook, but that didn't do much. I had to really cobble together on the go what I was going to do with students. And I'm proud to say, actually, that I'm still doing it year to year. Although I've been teaching and I have ideas, I don't teach from a prescribed set of here's what I'm going to do. I constantly am pulling from a set of practices, of activities, of conversation starters, instead of here's the unit objectives and here's the vocabulary goals that it's going to take to achieve that.
There's something around that. Well, I mean, here we are. Agency, volition, choice, and options about how you engage students, both because you know them, and it's a new batch of students every year, every class, right? The different levels that you teach. So I'm curious, how do you do that? How do you meet the needs of the students, even in something that's not necessarily, it's not fixed, because to me, language is organic, it's a living thing, and it's always shifting and changing. But the idea of, students learning another language outside their own. And in particular, I'm curious how you serve your heritage speakers.
This is where I should own up to another one of, I would call it a consortium that I belong to called Organic World Language. And I've been part of this group for 10 years now. And we're just a group of world language teachers that have been looking for solutions for how to help students really learn the language in a way that is less about rote memorization and conditioned responses like you might expect from an app or a traditional curriculum that where 90% of the instruction is in English, right? We set out to address the question of how can we get students to experience the language mostly in the target language. And so that's kind of the problem, that any world language teacher listening is familiar with this. And I just want to dangle out then that, for me, what initially attracted me to this was the idea of play. When I was doing my bachelor's degree, before I even knew I was going to become an educator, I studied in anthropology, and my mentor, David Lancy, he was an expert on studies of play around the world and what play does for the creation of community, for the creation of democratic institutions. Right? There's the arbitrary nature of rules and outcomes that we're setting, and that players of games, whether they're children or adults, they sometimes negotiate that. And so there's something powerful to play that I really was attracted to when I first started experimenting with OWL. My students, when we first did it, and I didn't know, sorry, OWL being organic world language, I went off of a report. I didn't even have a video or an expert to tell me. I just heard what it was about, which, to describe it, we placed aside our desks. When I heard about this, I just had students pick up tables. We were using tables of two. Right? I had them put them on the side of the classroom, and the chairs also, and we just stood in a circle. And I introduced a prompt and asked students to respond a little bit. We did some paired partner practice where I teamed them up with somebody, would have them talk with someone, and then rotate, the outside circle so they were speaking with a new partner. And the feedback I got from students right away was that it felt like they were playing a game. And I was like, okay, this is for me. There was a book that came out by the author Wynne. I can't remember. He's a researcher a philosopher at University of Utah, but he actually titled his book Games, Agency as Art, right? Where he would say, like, a painter works in the medium of painting with paint. A sculptor works in the medium of stone or wood or metal, but with games, the medium is agency of individuals, because we're arbitrarily constraining ourselves. With world language, the arbitrary constraint is that we ask them to set aside their home language or the first language, and just imagine that they can only use the target language in Spanish. And then other things that we do too is that we try to downplay, like a traditional language class as I had it and as I taught the first 8 years of my career is very focused on what you're doing wrong, right? So here's why you're pronouncing this word wrong. Don't mix up this word with that one. Here's a prescribed grammatical pattern that we want for you to use. Or a topic where you've got to choose your responses from this vocabulary list. And if they don't, there's consequences for that. They could get marked down point-wise. They could be humiliated in front of their peers. But in the organic world language classroom, we emphasize what they do right, or what they can do right. And so it's very common, and it's in keeping with the American Council of the Teaching of Foreign Languages. With, like, their research shows that you really shouldn't be expecting grammatical perfection from students until probably, to demand it of them anywhere in the first few years of their learning experience is not very realistic, unless they're supposed to be memorizing and practicing that. But if they're just speaking and communicating, you should expect all kinds of grammatical problems. But are they communicating well? Right? And so we make it, one way that you can get students to want to take the risk of communicating anything at all is to turn the focus towards a game or a play or an interaction, or put up a silly picture and ask them to describe it or react to it in some way, or what's wrong with this picture, or play a song for them and ask them to, maybe circle an emoji that expresses their reaction to it, and then write a couple of words just saying why they chose that particular emoji. Ways that are more familiar and that lower what world language teachers call the affective filter, making it so that more input is likely to actually go in and stay in.
So in my perspective, I see reflected in you a very kind of clear intention around pedagogy, practice, what's really working for students. So I'm curious whether from that lens or just learning in general, right? Not necessarily language learning. What have you seen really work? I mean, you're kind of mentioning this kind of appreciative inquiry approach, gamifying. I'm hearing more in education around badging and gamifying. And I think about, my son, whether board games or video games or like leveling up. there's really something to that. I don't know if it's a dopamine hit or what's happening, but there is a kind of a natural excitement that occurs. So whether it's that and a deepening perspective on those, or is there something else that you're seeing that's really working, an approach, a model, framework, whether it's in practice or policy, that works for many students?
I am familiar with gamification as the phenomenon, as well as badging is going on. I can't say, I mean, although there are certain games that I introduce, I think that the attitude of play is what's key, as opposed to badging, where like there's certain things that people accomplish and then they receive a badge for that. I mean, that's another way of, earning a credential, right? Or something that goes on your transcript. And I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but I'm not super familiar with, the discussion happening around that. When it comes to, I guess, models or approaches, in my experience, as well as some of the most exciting stuff that I've seen my colleagues working with at school, has just been to add in the questions around identity that are happening more and more in our classrooms. And so I've been teaching ethnic studies also for 4 years, but I've seen some science teachers as well as math teachers, and of course our ELA art, that when they've added in aspects of identity, whether it's ethnicity and race, sexuality, nationality, spirituality, able-bodiedness, all of these things, it really adds in, I guess it opens the door for students to connect different aspects of their learning in a way that they never have before, right? So even like a simple activity at the end of class, where in one class, for instance, because of the way that a class can unfold, and students will sort of they'll sometimes challenge me to explain to them how to say something. They can't use English for it, but how do we say this? And when they do that, and I recognize, okay, this is a big thing. Like I had one year, students unlocked the word proud in my classroom. That's just great. We were able to end the classroom with the activity called one word wraparound, where I just pass around a little object and I pose the question after we explored the word proud and pride and things like that. And I just posed the question, what's one thing that you're proud of? Anything, right? And there was one kid who said, I'm proud that I haven't eaten any Oreos today. And, another student who was proud of his car, proud of his family. But when we had a student who just put forward, I'm proud of my sexuality. And that was a huge risk. Students had no idea what that meant, and she didn't give us any details, but it was something that was a huge risk and that brought the whole class together. And this was a first year Spanish class. It really unified the class, and it gave me also a lot of input then as to, okay, here's what matters to these students. What can I build for future activities around this? What can I go and look for, whether it's an advertisement in Spanish or a song that deals with one of these themes? And so that then gives me the ability to pull off.
So the questions, who am I, contextualizing, making meaning and relevance for your students. This is what I mean by trusting teachers, right? And not being necessarily what I refer to as kind of like married to a lesson plan, like cannot deviate, cannot adapt. But you're saying, I hear students, we're going to engage who they are, and I'm going to find content that responds and matches.
And that's, the wisdom of asking teachers to create a lesson plan. I do understand that, and I don't want to push too hard against it, because I went through a system myself like that, where it was just really a matter of, the same as you would expect a chef. Early on, right, you've got the recipe, and they're just asking, have you got your fat? Have you got your salt? Have you got, some vegetable in there? Like, what are the pieces that you should include to make it an interesting dish? Or with a musician, have you got your instrument tuned? Have you got all these things? You do the warm up. But once you have some experience, it's time to start ad-libbing, and it's time to start creating on your own. And I feel that, fortunately, where I'm at, although I do continue to lesson plan, it's taken on a much more simplified note. I'm not sure if you're familiar at all with Miles Davis. When I read his autobiography years ago, and I remember when he talked about the kind of blue sessions, how he just went in with sketches, right, of what he wanted to do. And that's what I do. I create a sketch, and I ask students to help me fill it in. Another favorite metaphor, the Chilean. You knew I was going to mention a Chilean, Alejandro Aravena. He won the Pritzker Award in architecture a few years ago for his work that he's done. And he, if you can imagine, like the frame of a house, one of his ideas that got him this award was they were having a massive influx of people into the cities in northern Chile and were facing a homelessness crisis. Sound familiar? This was a decade ago, with immigrants coming from out of the country as well as just the countryside and showing up in the cities, and the government was trying to create housing for them. But of course, the budget shortfall. So his idea was, instead of building houses for all these people showing up in the cities, was to build half a house for them. So it was just enough space where they could live, maybe a little uncomfortably, but they were able to establish some stability. And if you were to see it, imagine the frame then. So it's just like the left side of a house, and the other side is empty, but it's got the roof over there and the frames around there. And so once the family has some stability, they can supply the rest of the house and build it however they want. And it doubled the amount of homes that they could build right off the bat. I think that our goal as teachers are like that. One of our goals, or one of the ways that I see it with my sketches, with my planning, and that my colleagues that are the best at this, is to see that, okay, we're only putting out part of this, and we've got to be watching for what the students bring and how we can connect it or help them to see the connection.
That's a beautiful metaphor.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, you should look it up. If you just go, anyone could find this. If you just type in Alejandro Aravena, that's Aravena, and then half house, and you can see pictures of these on Google.
But even the concept of that metaphor is, I'm going to come as a teacher with half the house built. My expertise, my years of training, exploration of this particular content or subject matter, but the students will bring the other half, and we'll build this together. There's something really profound about that partnership.
And to I guess circle back around to something that you asked about, and I don't think I adequately addressed, the heritage Spanish classes, right? These kids come with a whole mansion. I mean, we're not even talking about half a house. But the problem is that I've experienced, it's my problem as a teacher, because if I overplan and overdirect them, then oftentimes the students will experience what is happening, what I've got for them, as oppressive, as uninteresting. And so really the main idea is, how can I get my students to start talking and sharing? A great example that I'm fortunate to have already remembered to tap into at the beginning of this new school year, we were talking about refranes, just sayings, right? Common wisdom or proverbs that people often say. And it came up because we were listening to a song, and the singer was proud of a number of different aspects of Latinx identity. And one of the things he said was the refranes. And so we looked at what are some sayings, and I asked students to see if they could finish the saying. I mean, this is like a verbal half of a house, right? So we would start off, por la boca muere, and the student yells out, el pez. And so in some occasions where I've introduced little sayings like that, or topics, I realize, why am I trying to teach them about this? If they haven't experienced it, I know who has: their parents, their aunts, their uncles. So that's a real logical time where, instead of trying to fight against the cell phone issue, which is valid, that's a really great time to say, okay, it's time to pull out your phones. I'd like for you to text your parents and see if they can finish the saying, or if they, what did they have to wear uniforms at school, if that's what we're talking about. How far do they have to travel to school? And a lot of my students have never asked their parents about it, never had the chance to bring it up for whatever reason. And so I'm in at least a symbolic way, I'm inviting the parents into the space and their knowledge. And in some cases, I literally invite the parents into the space when we have the opportunity to say, okay, who would like to come in? Your students would like to hear from you about this. Who could make some time to come in and join us? We try to do that cautiously, of course, to not take away from their own pursuits. But I want them to know that although I'm leading the instruction of their students, that I really take seriously that they also are major.
Wow. For me, there's a theme of being in relation. Like, you give students this relational capacity, obviously parents and things, but just in relation with the language, in relation with each other, especially as they think about relation to their mother tongue.
Yeah, it is. It's something that, of course, not every student who I have in the heritage or AP Spanish classes has had a great relationship with the mother tongue. I hope to be able to rekindle that, but in most cases it's Spanish, but also we'll have a reasonable number, reason's not the right word, a significant number of people who also have a relationship to an indigenous tongue where Spanish is the oppressor's language.
Yes.
And we have to explore, like, is that something that is going to be difficult for you? Is that something that you want to rehabilitate? And for a lot of them, I mean, it's not anything that they've ever had to verbalize or even thought about in those terms. And I try to just help them see that, so that they can decide if they want to go on after a semester of study with them. I find it a bit concerning too that oftentimes my students have experienced like the most anxiety or the most shame around their language as a result of critiques coming from family or their own communities, where you're not saying it right, or you're forgetting our language, you don't love us, and the worst, you butchered our language. And so that's something that I try to help them, understand. Well, this is where concepts of like the third space become really helpful, where we don't want you to pretend that you are fully from the motherland of your parents, or here also, because there's something different, there's something special about you, and you're occupying a third space as millions have before you, where you're able to go back and forth. You're the master of two worlds, and you have that ability to choose what you're going to say, and you're making something new. So of course it's going to sound weird to your parents. Of course that's going to happen.
There's something about W. Du Bois's concept of double consciousness that it seems expanded here in third space, right? So I have to fit in this world and that world, but really it's a third place that I emerge.
Precisely. Du Bois, yeah, his ideas about that double consciousness. I mean, that's for me pure biography right there, as well, as I'm sure that you've had some experience with. Growing up, I was somehow between those two worlds, and worried and anxious about it all the time, unsure if I could claim my own indigeneity, as I introduced myself, part Aymara. And that's something that I've only learned to articulate as an adult. When I sent in my college application, I checked the box for Native American on there, because we are, although I came to realize years later that maybe the US government doesn't consider me that, because I'm not Native American from within their borders, right? And it caused me some anxiety too, to think, am I taking away educational opportunities from others as well? And these are questions that I had to wrestle with all throughout college, and have made my peace with through my own solutions of trying to support others, educate about it, to honor my ancestors, as well as to help others connect with, honor their ancestors, and to recognize and challenge the effects of colonization in their own lives.
So I have a question here. I'm not sure kind of where it fits exactly, but because I'm really so inspired by your approach here. But you named some challenges for heritage speakers, and there's a whole lot there. I mean, that could be unpacked for, a whole nother episode. But I'm curious of what challenges do you see in education? And you're already giving, I think, well, what do we do? What are the responses to these challenges? In terms of practice, there's some challenge, I think, of engagement. But, if it goes beyond that, I'm curious your perspective, being in a school building for 20 years and then seeing shifts over time, especially at the high school level. How many students have you seen drop out? How many, just all the things of life happening. I'm curious, just your perspective with all of your years of service. What challenges do you see? And again, for the whole system, not necessarily just for students.
Thank you. A few that come to mind, and I'll elaborate on these, I guess, as I go along. But an initial challenge that we've got to overcome is the deserved, I believe, apathy that is found in a lot of classrooms, right? We are, of course, being asked to compete with and manage students' attention, and the attention industry, really, I mean, what we're looking at with a lot of devices, it's really about attention, because that's what the corporations behind the devices and the apps are after. It's just attention. But we've done a lot. Like, we can't all just point at the devices or the corporations. We've done a lot to bring this on ourselves, because of maybe our reluctance to either change to keep up with what's going on outside of the schools, or our inability to really connect with and understand what it is that students are interested in accomplishing with their lives. We're asking a significant investment of their own time and attention. And what do they get for that? If at the end of the day, I mean, a diploma is nice, and I believe it's absolutely necessary to participate more fully in society. but that doesn't sound like it means a whole lot to people. And if we can find a way, I guess the big concern that I have here that I would love to see addressed a little bit more is we've got to make our classes more relevant. And it's good to learn to do hard things that could be abstract and unconnected. I think that that's a fine, opportunity to offer to people as well. But if that's by and large what the experience is at school, and that the practical aspects of, how am I going to use this, what am I going to do with it, that might turn students as well as parents. I've seen that in several conferences turn them off. And so, like, kudos to my colleagues in social studies and ELA who are leading some amazing transformations in what they do, and seeing, we're not just dumping facts and names of authors and so forth into students. We're teaching them how to wrestle with, how to recognize misinformation, how to have debates and conversations with people and remain agreeable still, how to refine and articulate your own ideas better and maybe even exercise more persuasion. These are things that I think you can transfer into real world skills that, and I hate saying real world, pardon me. I think that schools are just as real as what's happening outside, but these are things that we can translate then into professional skills or interpersonal skills that students can use the rest of their lives. And so overcoming the apathy, I think, through just being more searching, more probing, and more willing to upturn maybe some old practices or values in the classroom. Another challenge that I see in schools is really, I frame it as a positive problem, but we've got untapped reservoirs of cultural capital, of community cultural wealth. And with the advent of proficiency language testing, such as the stamp, right, to attain the seal of biliteracy, I think that we haven't tapped into the radical possibilities of what that could do for other disciplines as well. What if we had proficiency testing for math or for English, right, where a ninth grader who happens to know, who's able to articulate ideas in a certain way and is already, very well read, could demonstrate their skill with something like that, and what we could do to open up the amount of learning that's already happening outside of our classroom. I'd love to see that happen. Sure. I think that could transform schools in a way that would unsettle us, because it would make it a little bit more challenging for teachers to, we'd have to set aside maybe these prescribed curriculum. And what do we do then if we've got a class where it's more like herding cats instead of sheep who go along with and go through the same processes? We're managing independent people. Do they really need us? But do students need to learn to be managed? And if that's the number one outcome of schools, is that they've got to accept management from other people, that's a problem. So,
well, even the word management, right? If it's that kind of a learning model where students can show what they know, right, and demonstrate it in various, and they're going to be at all different levels and spectrums, right? Because that's right. People. So then how does the system respond to that kind of dynamic reality and be relevant for each? I think this half the house metaphor, I'm leaving with this, Dan. Like, there's something very powerful about this concept. It is, that synthesis, that collaboration, I think could be very rich. And essentially, I just, even in your thinking here, I see it's IEP for everyone, right? It's like, what is my individualized learning plan, and what do I want for my trajectory? There's something very much back about agency and choice and preparing students for a world after schooling.
Yeah, and the teacher, although I think very few teachers are clinging to the idea of the teacher as the sage on the stage, right? Yes. I like to think of myself sometimes a little bit more as like a tour guide. But that really gets to know, maybe like I've thought of myself, instead of preparing units, I'm taking you through islands, like on a canoeing trip or something. And I know where stuff is at, but as I get to know the people who are going with me on this trip, I can curate and say, okay, I know that Esteban over here is into soccer, right? I'm going to bring in this, and I'm just looking and going through the world doing my thing, but I see stuff that I know is going to appeal to Esteban, or that Jimena is probably going to really be interested in, or that Luis has had some experience with. And so I can bring it in and ask them to supply other parts of the house. And all of a sudden the focus is taken off of me. In some cases, the student gets the chance to say or lead, us through an exploration of what something means. That's what I'm always looking for. I'm that guide that maybe knows where some stuff is at, but I'm going to turn to others for their expertise to help me set up camp. Which way are we going to go now?
And I think that's where teachers are extremely relevant. So for our listeners, in and out of education, I'm curious, do you have a particular call to action?
My main one would be simply to repeat, let's build a pedagogy of agency. Let's build classrooms and places where students feel trusted, feel already competent, and are perhaps awakened to what they already have and the power of that, whether it's through their own efforts or maybe just what they have through their ancestors or through their culture. And let's show them what happens when they create or make with that, and then find ways to publish that to the world, to their families, to their communities, so that others can join us in celebrating that with them. And they get a little dose of that. What's the happiness?
The dopamine, serotonin,
dopamine. Thank you. They get that little rush of dopamine that, wow, I did that. I want more of this. And that creates that cycle of agency that I just would love to see more and more students feeling. I think that one of the number one downers that I've seen in students, like again and again, is I see students who feel lost, who feel like, why try, who are struggling to just even be present in class mentally. Is I dig just a little bit, I find out that it's a sense of a loss of agency. They feel trapped. They feel that there's nothing that they can do. They feel that their efforts aren't yielding any reward, and that's a loss of or a taking away of agency. Let's make a pedagogy for agency.
Thank you for that. Yeah. I've been wrapping these interviews up with a question about your own experience in schooling. I'm curious, what was the impact? And I especially think about what did it do for your spirit? Like, did it uplift it? Did it crush it? What was the experience what was your schooling experience, and what was its impact on you?
My schooling experience, I was good at playing school. I learned really quickly what was expected. And so I had very few problems with like being in a classroom, but I wasn't really doing much until like right around my early high school years. A couple of things fell into place where I had some teachers who got under my skin, and they were making declarations that I took as a challenge. Like, these are the great poets, these are the great authors. And we would then read a story about them for a week, by them. But I took it under my skin to find out like why, and to challenge that and to dig at and attack them. And I would spend a lot of time at the local library. So my relationship to education really began to take off when I wanted to challenge what was being said, and where I felt like I didn't have to accept what I was being told. And it really kicked into high gear after I read the autobiography of Malcolm X in 10th grade. Saw it on a TV show. Someone mentioned it. I'd never heard of him. So I went and got a copy and read it, and it changed my life because I realized, okay, I could liberate myself through my own study the way that he did when he was in prison. I could start asking questions, and I could engage with ideas, and whether I believe or not what I'm saying, there's arguments to be made. And so that launched me in a direction of realizing that it wasn't about me just getting what they were telling me. It was about what I was going to do with what I was being taught in school. At the same time, throughout high school, I really got into performing arts, initially with band and then with drama. And when I tried out for drama, the half of the house that I brought to that was that I'd been playing Dungeons and Dragons with my friends, and I didn't realize it, but I was building up the skill necessary to excel at drama through becoming a really good dungeon master. And when I showed up and found my community and found my friends, some of whom I'm still in contact with today, no class has affected my teaching quite so much as drama did, because I realized the audience matters. It's not about just standing there and delivering lines. It's about breathing life into them, but it's also about paying close attention to how the audience is reacting and giving them a little bit more or holding back a little bit more. And so that was really something that those are parts of my education I'm grateful for.
Thank you for that. It's funny, it kind of comes full circle when I hear about your response to challenging, right? It's actually you're harnessing then your own agency, and then the power of drama and theater of connecting with the audience, right? It's again a relational experience. It's not, when I think about banking, educate, we're going to open up your minds and pour in the knowledge, and it's a one-way experience, versus
right. That's television.
That's television.
Right. No, you get me though, Vincent. You get me. It's it all comes around, right? And I love that I get to be in a profession where my whole life, and there's other parts of my life too that we're not going to touch on here, and I don't know if I ever will, but I feel like it's all going with me into the classroom. And when I have moments of clarity, it just feels so beautiful that I'm doing something with that.
Well, thank you for making time, Dan. I'm so grateful. Thank you for sharing resources, sharing your knowledge and your time.
You're very welcome. Take care, Vincent.